So in this presentation, we're going to look at the results, discussion, and conclusion section of the paper. In other words, we're looking at the end of the paper. Before we look at the end of the paper, let's go back to the beginning and start with the introduction and see how it leads into the end of the paper. So in the introduction, we were looking at the background or context. Swales talked about this as establishing a territory. So we're looking at a territory and seeing why that's important. And the second rhetorical step that Swales described was where in that territory, we establish a niche, an area where we have found a problem of some sort and we can solve that problem. And our solution to the problem is the third rhetorical step, which is what are we going to do with our study and why is our study important? The introduction is also going to look at our hypothesis, where we say this is what we think is true. That is then going to lead into the methodology, where we describe how we're actually going to do the study or how we did the study. And that will then allow us to focus on, once we get the results, we can zoom in and look just at the results. So we're not worried about the context here. In the results section, we're reporting the data, strictly reporting the data, objective results that we have gotten from our methodology. So that's the results section. The discussion section is somewhat different, and for that I'm going to take a look at an example from this article, which is about an intervention which was done in a school system where they were telling adolescents about how to take medications, over-the-counter pain medications. So this article here's the results section. So in the results section, we want to discuss the results. And we'll see that here. They talked about the two groups, the test group and the control group. And this is in past tense, so they did not differ in their distribution about age, grade, gender, race. So no difference was observed. It's in past tense. Or the participants reported taking over-the-counter pain medications. Control group were observed. Right? This is all in past tense. Right. Now, as we discuss the results, though, we're talking about what happened in the study, but we're also discussing what we're showing in the paper. So as we display the results, for example, here, the two groups are shown, the variables of the two groups are shown in Table 2. That's in present tense because it's happening right now in the paper. We're showing that right now, so that's in present tense. Here again, Table 3, so the variables at the pretest are shown. Or down here in Table 4, the post-test are shown. So the displaying the results, we're talking about what's happening in the paper, that's in present tense. Whereas discussing the results from the methodology, what happened in the study, that's in past tense. So we're going to be mixing back and forth between past and present tense depending on whether we're reporting what happened or talking about what we're doing right now in the paper. Right, now, in the results section, we talked about data that was objective. Now, in the discussion section, we're zooming back out and we're going to relate the data that we gathered with that context, with the other things that we talked about in the introduction. We have to relate this back to the context. We have to relate it back to our theoretical framework. We need to relate our results back to those previous studies that we looked at in the literature review. Did our hypothesis turn out to be true or false? Did we prove or disprove our hypothesis? We need to connect back with that. Another thing that we might need to discuss in this section is limitations. So how generalizable are our results? So here is an example from that paper. In this discussion section, we can see the theoretical framework is mentioned right here. SCT stands for sociocognitive theory. So they're relating it back to their theory that they're operating under. Previous work, you can see over here, they use the word previous a couple of times, talking about previous investigations, previous research. So they're connecting back to what they discussed in the literature review. Also, an interesting feature of the discussion section is hedging language. Hedging language is where we make a modification to how strong our claim is. So for example, right here it says an SET-based intervention may alter the expectations that an adolescent population places on the consumption of over-the-counter medication, pain medications. We're making a claim here that it's true or it may be true. So it seems to be true. So we're not making a very strong claim. This is a very typical feature of academic language, is that we're very careful not to make claims that are too strong. So we have to make claims based on evidence. So later we'll see why they're making very, very careful claims here, but say they may alter. Or down here, the increases in behavior capability and outcome expectations found here are believed to be. All right, so we're not 100% sure, but they seem to be, they are believed to be key components of this intervention. So that may be proved wrong. So we're making a claim, but not a super strong one. In this paper, there actually is an entire section called limitations. And one of the major limitations they list here is that they say the results are not generalizable. And that's a major limitation, since the goal of research is to create generalizable knowledge. To say this in the paper, that the results of our paper, the results of our study are not generalizable, is a major admission. And that's a good thing, because by doing that, the researchers are building credibility. They're not claiming more than what they really have evidence for. So if you make claims that are beyond your evidence, you undermine your own credibility. So down here they also say one of the reasons it's not generalizable is that they did not control for all of the variables. In just a moment we'll see why they didn't do that. Now, having limitations leads us directly into further research. So further research, we're going to continue our research in this area and try to deal with some of those limitations, possibly. So one of those, we need to do future research. The researchers say that they need to do future research because they had done this study in only one school system in one situation. Of course, that's not generalizable to all situations, so they need to do further studies in other school populations to see if the same thing occurs in other populations as well. Then they might have something that's generalizable. Another limitation they mentioned down here was that they did not control for the variables of academic performance and intelligence. And we could imagine why they might not have controlled for those. To do that, they would have had to gather the grades and intelligence scores for all of the subjects that they were studying. Of course, the IRB permission for collecting the grades and IQ scores for a whole mass of students would have been a very big hurdle. The safeguards you would have to be put in place to protect the student's identity under FERPA would be quite something. So this would be a major hurdle for their IRB. So they probably decided that it was not worth it for this study to try to control for those. So in the future, maybe if they had another study, a bigger study, and they had the resources to control for this, it might be worth it. Now there's also a conclusion section in this paper, and in the conclusion you would reiterate the thesis statement, as in the classic English essay that you've probably written before. The thesis statement is going to be very reasoned. In other words, it's going to be evidence-based. We're going to connect to the evidence of our paper. Circumspect. Another aspect of the thesis statement is that it should be circumspect. Circumspect comes from two words that you might know from Latin. Circum, you might have heard circumference or circumnavigate, words like that. So circum comes from the word, or is related to the word circle. Spect has to do with seeing, as in spectator, or inspect. So circumspect means you're looking around. So you could imagine crossing a busy street, you would look around. You're looking around because you are being careful. So the thesis statement, we're going to state our claim, but we're going to state it in a way which is based on evidence, and we're also going to be very careful because we do not want to overstate our claim. So we want to say what we found, but not make any stronger claim than our evidence really can back up. And you're also going to discuss the opportunity to do further studies or further questions that you have that you or some other researcher could investigate. All right, here's the conclusion from the paper we were just looking at. So the thesis statement is right here at the beginning. The results of this intervention suggest that lessons based on sociocognitive theory can improve. Right? Notice can. They're hedging a little bit. Doesn't mean it absolutely will, but it can improve the outcome expectations placed by an adolescent population on the consumption of over-the-counter pain medications and assist in developing the knowledge and skills necessary to consume these products properly. All right, so that sums up their findings very succinctly, but it's also very circumspect. It's not making a claim that's bigger than their evidence suggests. So that's a thesis statement. They're also going to touch on the significance of their findings. They're saying this may be, notice again the hedging, that may be of particular importance. So they're stressing the significance. And then finally, they cover other possibilities for research. So this should be replicated. You should do this again in other schools that are somewhat different demographically. And so then you could possibly get a generalizable result if you do enough of these studies. Now, look at another paper that we looked at in the discussion of introductions. This is the one where we were discussing finding appropriate plastic wrap to cover vegetables and fruit so that they do not mold or rot as quickly. So in this one, here's the results and discussion section of this paper. Notice it's not results section followed by discussion, but we have both results and discussion in the same section. They're combined, and we'll see in a minute why they're doing that. Right, so we start off, we have results, we have a specific film, and specific densities are reported. So this section, you're going to see a lot of technical data. It's also in past tense. So there was no significant difference. So they're reporting the results in past tense. The film had the lowest density. Right? Now here, they're talking about table 1. So they're showing these densities in table 1, which means really we should have present tense. But again, you're switching back and forth. I can see why the authors might have gotten confused as you shift back and forth between what you're doing in the paper now and what the results were that you're reporting from your study. So that can really get confusing. So here the authors went the wrong direction. They took a wrong turn on the tense. Now, the next one is another interesting situation. All the casted film samples have around 1 millimeter thickness. That's in present tense. And you think, all right, that's logical. They were 1 millimeter thick when we started. Probably they're still 1 millimeter thick when they finish, so why not use present tense? That is logical. However, you're talking about what you did in your methodology in the study, so that should really be in past tense. What I would do is to simply say 1 millimeter thick samples of all casted films were used. Then we avoid having to worry about whether or not the samples still exist or whether they were still 1 millimeter thick when we finished our study. All of that mind-bending confusion we don't have to worry about. I would just focus on the fact that we used them and they were 1 millimeter thick samples that we used, and then we're done with it. So this is a good place to avoid using a finite verb connected to the samples. Down here is another verb. This one is in passive, but it's really not grammatical. So it should be, instead of are needed to be noted, but I would just say need to be noted. This is what's happening in the paper right now. We need to note the densities. So that's happening now. So that should be in present tense. Now here's another present tense. Density is a function of chemical composition. Now the reason for this being in present tense is because this is a basic physical law or principle. And so things that are always true, they should be in present tense. So H2O boils at 100 degrees Celsius at a standard atmospheric pressure. That's always true. We're not going to put that in past tense. So this should be in present tense because it's a basic physical law or a physical principle. Now this is the next page of that. I've taken an excerpt of the next page of this paper, and we continue. Here's past tense reporting the results. The water vapor sorption was approximately linear, right? Or the slope of the curve decreased. These are all the results. Samples absorbed water vapor. And here again, this is another example of present tense, but this is the behavior is typical for materials that follow fixed law. All right, so this is a physical law, present tense. This should be always true. And here's another one. They're talking about a possibility. If what they're thinking is true, then this is another basic principle. So it's in present tense. That's good. Now notice here we have shown in figure 5, again, the authors, with all this back and forth between past and present tense, got a little confused. So that should really be are shown because it's happening right now in the paper. Now this next place that we're seeing can be. Now can be is, as you'll remember, that's hedging language. So hedging language is typical for the discussion section. So we're not showing results here. We are discussing them. We're interpreting those results. And we see more of that over here. After they talked about the samples absorbing water vapor, then they say that the explanation might be, right? Or down here, the size of the cluster might not be the only factor. So these paragraphs we're looking and we see they're reporting results, but then they're interpreting them right away. And so why is that? Why are they mixing the results with the discussion? Now, if we look at the original paper, this is several pages. This is very long. There's several pages of results and discussion. They have a lot of very technical results. If they were going to report all the results and then try to discuss them, these different results, it would be very tedious because they would basically have to repeat all of the results in order to interpret each of them. So in this situation, it's a much better idea for them to say, we're not going to have separate results and discussion section, but we're going to share one result and then discuss it. We'll interpret those and then share another result and discuss that. So this is the pattern they follow here. So rather than giving you all of the data and then interpreting it, in this case it makes a lot more sense to give you a little data, explain it, give a little more data, and explain that. So a very different pattern. What you could do next is to take a paper that you're writing or to take a paper that you're studying and look at the results and discussion sections and see what you find there. What's the pattern? What's the rhetorical structure of that paper? What are the tenses that they're using? In your own paper, think about what would be the most effective way for you to structure your results, discussion, and conclusion.